If we look at the data of Marvel Comics in particular, and this is a good case to kind of go through, they suffered a big kind of market correction in 2016, 2017. Now, they were still profitable, and it's important, again, we use our terms right. They made money, they just made less money, and things were not catching as they were. So why is this? Let's go into kind of precisely what the data tells us. Hey there, this is Perch. This is one of those discussion points, one of those videos that I should be putting up graphs and other things. And one of these days I'll record in the studio, and I will, to the studio, in my office, um, in the place where there's a desk and a chair, that place, the studio. I will record with some details and some numbers and can walk everybody through it. But I think there's a lot of platform discussions, and that's what this is. This is a discussion where I'm simply going to kind of lay out the platform of data, and we can kind of take a look at it, digest it, and then people can go off and kind of analyze it the way they want. But it is a fact that about 2016, 2017, there was a correction in the market for Marvel. What I mean by correction, because I think terms can mean a lot of things to a lot of people, it's that they saw some nice healthy growth coming in 2014, 2015. Axis as an event was not as popular, and then they suffered a little bit with some of the relaunches. The Uncanny Avengers did very well for them. That was the first kind of all new, all different Marvel. I don't remember what it was called. Maybe it was all new or all different, but there's been several variations of that. Newer books like Miss Marvel were doing very well. It was a surprise hit. They were starting to do better with their mid-tier. And then a few things happened. We had Axis. We had Secret Wars, which did very well, but also kind of caved the middle. Like if you think about it in terms of the U.S. economy, the rich got richer, the poor kind of stabilized, and the middle class disappeared to some extent. That's what a good analogy to think of what happened during Secret Wars. It helped some titles, but the middle tier sunk. And when Secret Wars is over, people didn't come back. It actually, and a lot of that was, and it's a video for another time, a lot of that was how Secret Wars ended. It ended in such a way that it felt like a good conclusion to a story. So it was a perfect jumping off point for a lot of readers. And then Marvel did not do enough good things at the end of that story to take advantage of the fact that you had the big Secret Wars event. They kind of just said, now things are back to normal. They kind of did this time jump, but it was weird. Like X-Men did it, but at that point people knew Bendis was going to leave X-Men, and the Inhumans were killing the mutants. All levels of that were done poorly. So that was a problem. Civil War II did poorly, and Secret Empire did poorly as events go. And so that's where the anchor of a lot of more Marvel sales were coming from. So why? Why did this happen? Well, a number of people have speculated that it was the SJW, the social justice warrior influence, that actually caused things to collapse. The problem with that argument is it's almost impossible to prove or disprove, because the definition of SJW is not fixed, and it also forces you to make some jumps in logic behind a creator has these politics, therefore made these decisions, which therefore resulted in poorer sales. But the decisions that were made are not clear. It's drawing a lot of conclusions that we don't have firm answers to. That's not to say that political ideology and these other things did not hurt comics. I mean, I think you could make that case, but it's a harder case to make than some of the more obvious data points we have. And the biggest one is in 2014 and 15 in particular, a little further back, 2012 to 2015, Marvel moved to a strategy in particular where events were driving the majority of their sales. That, if you just look at the breakdown of where the dollars were coming from, events, number one, relaunches, kind of specialized issues were taking up a bigger chunk of who they were and what they were doing. So it stands to reason, therefore, that if the event is not as popular in a given year, the numbers are going to be down more because the event is driving more of their sales. So again, Marvel still made money. Some people have said it's this big confusion people have around, you know, underperforming or, profits going down does not mean loss. It just means you made less money, less profit than the previous year. And that's what happened to Marvel. And so the events were definitely a big factor. Like I said, Secret Wars ended. It did not do a lot to boost up the middle tier and the lower tier of books, so their numbers all softened collectively. And keep in mind, if you're publishing, the other part of Marvel's strategy was to put out, like 80, 100 books a month. That may be exaggerating a bit. That's too high. But let's say 80. Marvel's putting out 80 books a month. Okay, if 40 of those books, half of them, all lose, 2,000 orders each issue, then you're talking about 80,000 less sales. And that number, when you're relatively got a thin profit margin, everything else, that number is impactful. And if you have an event where the normal curve of an event is, say, 160,000 issues in issue 1, tailing to 100,000 by issue 8, let's say that's just, say, 20% down. Well, that 20% adds up to be well over 250,000 fewer books sold over the life of the event. That's the challenge that these comics have. And so both Civil War II was much lower than people expected. And when the core event is lower, it means all the tie-ins are also subsequently lower. So everything kind of suffers. And then Secret Empire not only was it not the right time, people were not in the mood for it. I think on either side of the political equation, I think the people who were happy that Trump won felt like it was a dig at Trump. And the people who were unhappy that Trump won did not want to be reminded that Trump won in their comic books. So I think both sides, rejected Secret Empire to some extent. And so you have 2 years in a row of two events, both softer, and then you have erosion of the middle tier and the lower tier of books softer. And that's, that is your problem. That's exactly why you had a down year and when you had trouble from Marvel. And remember, when Marvel's taking up, say, 40% of the unit and dollar sales of the entire comic industry, if they're having a down year, everybody is having a down year. Comics in general are suffering, and that's what happened. So we go back to, again, why did this happen? Well, because Marvel put way too much of their weighting on events. That's problem number one. Number two is that they allowed erosion in their middle and lower tier books down 5,000 copies per book, which adds up across their line to be significant. And in addition to that, the other factor is Marvel did start employing more, I would say, no-name artists. Now, some of these no-name artists were quite good and now have, through the Young Guns program and everything else, they've gotten a name and it's helped them. But comics are sold on events, on characters, and on the creators. So if suddenly the artist is an unknown artist and the writer is relatively new as well, you've got kind of a double problem on your hands of the event is not selling the book, the character is not selling the book, and the creative team is not selling the book. So you take like the Hawkeye series that Kelly Thompson was on. Kelly Thompson is become a bigger name, certainly at Marvel now, but 4 years ago was relatively new to the scene and hadn't built up that credibility. What people knew of her was as a kind of a CBR columnist that was prone to kind of tantrums, if you will. Nothing against her, just that's kind of the reputation that she had. I guess that's probably is against her if I'm saying it that way, but it is what it is. But she was a relatively unknown name, and then she was working on Hawkeye and other books with completely unknown artists in a lot of the case. So that doesn't help. Marvel also, and they've been doing this for some time, continued to shift in their strategy of having the big name known artists on the cover only, and then newer talents on the inside. And the challenge with that is that fans and the customers got wise to the fact that the artists on the interior were not the same as the exterior, and Marvel pushing their variant strategy more and more and more meant that they had to pay more and more to the higher end artists, the J. Scott Campbells, the Rob Liefelds, or whoever they've got doing their variants. They're paying them more to come in and do these variant covers that really do not, it doesn't help the interior book. So all these factors add up. And that's what really caused the correction that we saw. It also explains a little bit why things have gotten better in 2018 and 2019. It got better because Marvel did streamline their books a little bit. It got better because they did bring more name talents, whether it's Donny Cates coming up, Kelly Thompson getting more of a name, Jonathan Hickman coming back to the X-Men, Garth Ennis doing a Punisher book. I mean, you've started to get better names on these books, or at least known names on these books. That's going to help sales. And you also had a couple of events. You had Absolute Carnage do well in sales, and you had a couple others. Just War of the Realms did not do well, but the House of X stuff did, and so you've had a little bit of a change. You had a big kind of relaunch with some known artists and writer on Avengers and on Fantastic Four and Spider-Man. So you see it correcting a little. Now Marvel is still using a lot of their old strategy of you start a comic with a well-known artist for a couple issues, and then off they go. So Kubert is on Captain America, and then suddenly he is not. Suddenly we've got an unknown artist who draws Captain America. Pretty strange, I would say, and so it starts to hurt. Ta-Nehisi Coates has not stabilized as a writer in many people's minds across Marvel, like Kelly Thompson and Donny Cates have. So these are all little factors that have caused some positive correction, but not enough. And that's where the comic business sits. Now, to conclude, I'll come back to something I mentioned earlier. Is it actually SJW politics, so to speak, that caused this problem in the first place? Well, again, that's hard to say, and you can argue it both directions, probably with a lot of passion and some data. But unfortunately, the answer is inconclusive. Now, there will be people who will absolutely argue with this, no, for sure, and everything else. But if you look at the numbers, strictly at the numbers, you see that Civil War II, you see that Secret Empire, they bombed. So if you're going to say that SJW politics were a result of that, you're looking at the two and you're saying, okay, well, there's Nick Spencer doing Secret Empire, and there's Brian Michael Bendis doing Civil War II. Brian Michael Bendis had successful comic events in the form of Secret Invasion and House of M and Dark Reign and several other things that he had done sold very, very well for Marvel and had good numbers. So what happened? If you look at Civil War II, was it more SJWE, whatever that means, then those events? Did Brian Michael Bendis change? Because, sold well here, didn't sell well here. Nick Spencer, I think you could make an argument that, he never really had a big event under his belt. He was coming in more new, and so it was just the wrong fit for him. You can make that argument there, but it gets just harder to cite politics as the reason when a lot of the same individuals were writing the books before and after. Now, you might also say, well, it was Trump. Trump unhinged these people and caused them to write worse. And maybe the problem is saying you wrote better or you wrote worse. It still is very subjective. It's hard to pinpoint exactly like, yep, it's definitely, the writing definitely got worse. It's just hard. Quality is in the eye of the beholder. So it's very difficult to, land that argument one way or another. I'm not saying it's impossible. I am saying that, ideologically, the comics started pushing other narratives and other storylines that probably were unhelpful to the core characters. If you want to pick up a book and read about Superman or Batman or Captain America or Spider-Man, you're getting deluged on all sides of other media with social issues, seeing it again in a comic book is probably exhausting. I would agree with that. But where you draw the line and how you manage that gets very, very difficult. Marvel Comics has largely been successful over the decades because they did touch on social issues at least a little bit to make them seem like the world outside your window. But, have they gone too far? I mean, to me, yes, I will say Marvel has dipped too far into social issues in general to where it's distracting from their core story. I could sign on to that argument. But how do you pull that back? Where exactly did it go wrong? Who did it better than others? That's difficult. Because the reality is, if you took something like War of the Realms, and Russell Dauberman is certainly a known artist, up and comer. Some people like that work, but you say, okay, instead of Dauberman doing the art, it's going to be Jim Lee. Jim Lee is going to do the art. That event would have sold probably close to twice as much. Same writing, this different artist. So if the artist can make that much of an impact, then the argument would be, how much do social, factors in the writing really matter? They matter some, I grant you, but again, if you have Art Adams or Jim Lee or Mark Silvestri doing the story, I mean, if you had Mark Silvestri who did the art for the entire Batman run with Tom King, it would have sold higher, quite a bit higher. I don't think that whatever problems are going on with Tom King's script would have cannibalized Mark Silvestri's art. I maybe, but I don't think so. So if that's true, then I think the politics and the social issues and all the rest of that stuff, it matters a little bit less than people give it credit for. Not saying it matters zero. I'm just saying it matters less. I think the art team, scheduling, events just not landing like they could, I think all those have a much bigger impact. That's just me. That's how I look at the situation. I will sit down, I will look at the numbers, and I'll kind of point out, year by year, here's what happened. But I think there's some common sense that plays into this. If you've got a AAA top tier artist that's on a book, it's going to sell better than an unknown artist. That's just, I mean, everybody would agree to that. You can. There's plenty of data to support that. If you take a comic that is a kind of bread and butter Superman story, no politics, just Superman saving people from a building, you put an unknown artist on it, and you put that up against a book where Superman is dealing with some social issue around racism or something else, and you put Jim Lee on it, the Jim Lee book is going to sell better. The artist has that power. So where does it all play with social issues and writing and art? I think that's a really interesting question. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. How do you think about all this? I guess I just wanted to dispel the myth that I believe that it's SJW politics that wrecked Marvel in 2016. I think there are a lot of other factors in there. And I would argue some of those other factors probably mattered a lot more than the social issues. Equally damning, by the way, to the industry, the books, the line, everything else. A problem is a problem, but where that problem comes from is interesting. That's my point on it. Leave me a comment below, like, subscribe, let me know what you're thinking. Would love to talk to you further about this, and there will be more videos on this topic because it's an interesting one once you dig into all of it. Thanks for listening. Did I say follow me on Twitter? Yeah, follow me on Twitter, Comic Perch. Ask me questions there. It's all good. Thanks for listening.